Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, a proposed film about Philadelphia abortionist Kermit Gosnell garners $1.5 million in donations.
A biomedical waste plant in Oregon is reportedly burning the remains of aborted babies for energy.
A federal judge rules the state of Ohio must recognize same-sex marriages obtained in other states.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss headlines that deal with really fundamental moral issues. These are issues of family and marriage and life. Yes. And the reason that we focus on these issues is that they are really at the foundation of our society.
Yes, and a lot of the stories we'll cover will deal with abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly. So, Patrick, what's our first story for the day?
So in our first story, a fundraising campaign to make a movie about notorious Philadelphia abortionist Kermit Gosnell has reached $1.5 million out of its $2.1 million goal. The crowdfunded campaign seeks to expose the truth about Kermit Gosnell as well as the media cover-up surrounding the trial. So what did you think about this? This is really cool. So I guess we should start off with the whole crowdfunding thing. So because some people probably don't know about it. So this crowdfunding idea is you have a great movie idea, and then you can go to certain websites and you can say, hey, here's my movie idea. People fund it. And then if they reach the funding level, then the movie will be created and you had a piece in creating the movie. So it's kind of cool. So that's, I guess, the first part of this.
Exactly. And so in this case, what we're dealing with is Kermit Gosnell. So to give our viewers a little bit of background, if they're not familiar, this was an abortionist in Philadelphia who was arrested and convicted last year of murdering the babies that survived his botched abortion. So snipping their necks, and he was also convicted of manslaughter for a woman who died, a patient who died. And the conditions were really gruesome. They found a bloody clinic. There were babies, dead bodies being stored in the fridge, and severed feet. And it was just a nasty case. And he's now serving a life term in prison. But this case gained a lot of notoriety due to sort of the media coverage and the way that that was handled. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it was just one of those situations where I think that a lot of the news outlets tend to be liberal, but they weren't covering this story at all. And so people started using social media, Facebook, Twitter, and all sorts of different social media outlets to say, to raise awareness about, hey, media, contacting news stations saying, you need to cover this story. Nobody's covering this crazy story. And so really what it was the people really helped bring this story to light. So it was a huge media cover-up. No, it was going on for weeks. Other stories were being covered that were just ridiculous. And I think at the time it was like Manti Te'o or something was dating his imaginary girlfriend or something. And all these stories are making these huge headlines. And meanwhile, you have the most notorious serial killer in the history of the United States. This guy Gosnell killed more people than Gary Ridgway, John Wayne Gacy, the Zodiac Killer, and Ted Bundy combined.
Wow.
And it's thought that he killed many thousands of babies over 30 years. So this guy is just this, I mean, it's horrible what he's been doing and what they found, and the media is not covering it.
Right. And but as you said, it was really a grassroots movement. It was really the people getting on social media and saying, why aren't you covering this, that led that to happen. And so now the people have the same opportunity to fund this movie to really show and expose that. And so they said that they've gotten $1.5 million from I believe it's over 16,000 donors. So I guess one of the producers said he thinks this is currently the 4th most successful crowdfunding program ever. And so there's a lot of people. It's not just about getting big donors, but lots of people. And the producer said that they've had not only pro-life people donating, but women who regret their abortions, and even some people who favor legal abortion, but believe that there should be restrictions for the health and safety of women. And they're saying this is not okay what was going on with Gosnell. It's not okay the cover-ups, and they're promoting it as well. Yeah, it's really interesting the wide, the vast, types of people that are supporting this movie, and it really has. I think so. This is funded on Indiegogo, and one thing that was. And it's really easy to do. You can actually go to gosnellmovie.com, which will redirect you to Indiegogo, and then you can choose to support it, and it'll go to. You can use PayPal or your credit card via PayPal, and it's a fixed funding campaign. So basically, what you do is, say you donate $50. Say you only donate $1. You can donate anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000. Say you donate $1. You donate $1, it gets charged to your credit card that day. And then if they don't reach the campaign that they need, which is 2.1 million, then it gets returned to your credit card. Right, it all gets returned. So it's really kind of a neat idea. And they originally went with Kickstarter. They wanted to go there. Right. But apparently they switched to Indiegogo because the administrators of Kickstarter said that it was against community guidelines. But there was other stories that were of far worse nature and more graphic and things like that were funded. So they said, well, we're going to go with this other company. Right, and it's been very successful. Yeah. And one other interesting note about this sort of adds to the intrigue of the story is that there's also an element of political, maybe some cover-up or something going on here, because the governor at the time had opposed abortion restrictions that could have prevented this from happening. And that he was actually a Republican, so that it's important to remember that this is not a partisan issue. This is about life. Absolutely. It's not about a party line. But one of the film producers, Phelan McAclear, said, "The word went down from on high that abortion facilities were not to be inspected. They weren't inspected. So he kept killing, and he kept killing, and he kept killing." And so this is, I think, really raising some awareness of how little abortion clinics are inspected. There was an article recently about how in New York, hair salons are inspected and nail salons are inspected more often than abortion clinics. And so this is raising some awareness, and I think it will continue to do so. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully this crowdfunding campaign will be able to reach the goal of 2.1 million. It's ran from March 31st of 2014 to May 12th of 2014. So I think it's got 13 days left. And so we really, we wish them the best, because this would be a great movie to get out there and really make awareness, especially in lieu of the whole media blackout regarding this case. So definitely. What's our next story? In our next story, concerns have been raised in the United Kingdom after the British Columbia Health Ministry admitted that tissue from aborted babies was being used to produce electricity. Oh my gosh. Isn't it just sick? It is. It really, and they were taking the tissue and sending it over, this is from the UK, from British Columbia and sending it to Oregon, and they were burning the human waste to it was called a waste to energy program, and they're burning the human tissue to create electricity in Oregon. So really, really strange, sort of an odd story. They admitted this, the British Columbia Health Ministry admitted that the biomedical waste includes human tissue, such as surgically removed cancerous tissue, amputated limbs, and fetal tissue. Right. But their defense was, oh, well, we were following all of the safety health regulations. All the legal, Right. It's like one of those cases where, well, we're just following what the law says, so we can't be doing anything wrong. And I think that that's one of the things that you have to be careful with, especially in society today. People see a law that's passed, and sometimes people will do this for abortion. They say, well, I personally wouldn't get an abortion, but I want other people to be able to have the access to have an abortion for whatever reason. Some people say that. And it's like, well, once you make a law, everybody thinks that if it's law and it's okay, then it's good for you, or you should do it, or things like this. So I think this is one of those cases too where people are just following guidelines. They're like, well, I'm following what the rules are, but sometimes the rules aren't just. It's also like, maybe it never occurred to someone to write a law that specifically said you can't burn dead human bodies to make electricity. Just because the law hasn't specifically gotten around to banning this sort of weird practice doesn't mean that we should do it, kind of thing. So I think that's very true, that legal does not mean moral. Right. The Telegraph, the British publication, reported last month that at least 15,000 fetal remains were incinerated at 27 different hospitals in the UK throughout the past 2 years.
Right.
So this is not a one-of-a-kind thing. Yeah, exactly. This is happening.
It's happened all over the place. And I really think it speaks to the whole, just how people nowadays, it seems to be spreading, how there's just a lack, there's a disregard and a lack of respect for the human body. Because you think of somebody that you love, and you're not going to just donate them with a bunch of, slop them in with a whole bunch of biomedical waste to say, oh, we need, some more energy, we'll burn. You either cremate them respectfully, or they're placed in a coffin and buried in a cemetery.
Absolutely.
We have this respect for the human body. We were created in the image of God. And so we have that inherent dignity, every person, no matter how small, right? And so I want to quote Matt Walsh. I don't know if you've ever read his blog before, but he's got some really, I like his view, and he commented on the story, and this is what he said. He said, if we displace a few caribou to build a pipeline or disadvantage a couple of dolphins to drill for oil, the public outrage cannot be contained. The cries of injustice and eco-treason can be heard across the land, but using the corpses of dead kids like firewood, well, that's just a practical cost-saving measure now, isn't it? And I think it's just crazy, but that's how a lot of people think today.
It's really sad, yeah.
Yeah, and we just have to remember that, every person has that human dignity, and we have to remember that. Every person.
Absolutely, yeah. That's absolutely fundamental, and that's the key to this story and to so much of what we're missing.
Absolutely. And one last thing. Recently, a Marion County Board of Commissioners have announced that the practice of burning aborted babies for power will be stopped immediately.
Oh, okay.
They claimed
so they responded to this. Okay.
Yeah, they responded, and they said that they were unaware of the practice, but will now put it into it. So that's good. At least they're putting it into it. And I think that across the world, these things will probably be a little. Hopefully, people will hear stories like this and they'll think, oh, maybe we should check and see where we're getting our source of fuel from, and make sure that it's not from some. We're not using some immoral means or disrespectful means.
Absolutely. So. Exactly. Coming up after the break, we have a guest joining us in the studio to discuss a story from Ohio.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. For this segment of the show, we have a special guest joining us, Jenny Kraska, who is the director of the Colorado Catholic Conference. Jenny, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to be discussing the following story, which occurred in Ohio, where a federal judge said that the state must recognize same-sex marriages that were performed outside of the state of Ohio. Judge Timothy Black also said that the current laws that ban homosexual marriage were both unconstitutional and unenforceable. So, Jenny, what did you think about how did Judge Black come to the conclusion that the current laws, which had been in effect for quite some time in the state, how did he come to the conclusion that they were unenforceable and unconstitutional?
Sure. If you look at his decision, he bases a lot of it, I believe, on a misunderstanding of the Windsor case that came out of the Supreme Court last summer.
Yes.
And he believes that Windsor said that no state can have a constitutional amendment that would say marriage is only between a man and a woman. Therefore, he said because of that, because DOMA, I believe mistakenly, he said DOMA was struck down.
Right.
What we know based on the Windsor case is that not all of DOMA was struck down. There were sections of DOMA.
Exactly.
The biggest section being the definition of marriage, which Windsor did strike down. But it did not strike down another area of the law that said that states could still have their own laws, and those laws had to be respected, even if they were laws that conflicted with what Windsor might have decided.
Exactly. And so basically Judge Black is saying, hey, this is what happened in California. It was struck down, so therefore we can't have this law. But that's clearly not the case.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And at the same time, he says in his ruling, I found it interesting, he says that marriage, he describes it as a culturally foundational institution. What does that say to you when he's acknowledging that marriage is absolutely at the basis of our culture? Is that why it's so important?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, definitely that is why it is so important. It is a cultural, it transcends, as we've heard many people talk about, it transcends any religion or any particular political view or whatnot. It's something that has been around long before there was religion or organized religion.
Yeah.
And so it definitely is at the heart. It's a cultural manifestation that is to serve women and children, and we know that, and that's what's been expressed throughout time and history, with or without religious interpretation.
Right,
Yeah.
and the children are so key to that, because we're looking at, why does marriage exist? Why does the state have any interest in recognizing the sexual unions of adults? Well, because when men and women come together in a sexual union, they might produce a child. That's how children come into the world. And it's beneficial for children to have parents who are staying together to raise them. And so that's the benefit that marriage gives to society.
Yeah, stability, and also to continue society.
That's exactly right. I mean, and you know, at the heart of the decision really is, besides the marriage discussion and whatnot, is really just sort of a usurping of state laws, of the right of people in the state to make their own laws.
Right.
And I think that that should be an issue that's extremely scary.
Yeah.
On this ruling, because it sets a really bad precedent
It is scary,
for other states and other federal courts who have constitutional amendments that might protect marriage between a man and a woman. And now, by this judge's ruling, it seems to say that maybe, or at least it gives leeway for other judges to possibly come in and say, well, you know, Ohio decided this way, so why can't we?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see if it'll be overturned, because I know they're gonna try to.
Absolutely.
But like you said, it's just really scary when that sort of thing can happen, because that's the whole reason why we have states and then the federal laws, and it's so that states can decide what they want to do. And so I think there's something like 10 cases that are similar to this, where the federal government has been stepping in and overturning these state laws. So it's kind of a disturbing trend, and hopefully it can get reversed.
It is, yeah. I think this will be another issue that we'll see go to the Supreme Court of the United States, especially on this issue of states' rights,
Right.
and what are states able to do and not able to do.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just affect marriage. I mean, that's the sort of broader point here, is that as much as we may agree or disagree about a particular marriage issue, this could have a really huge effect on other things that are licensed in a state, and other areas of culture and commerce and things like that. So.
Yeah, and we're seeing this happen repeatedly now, where states are citing either the Windsor case or other states and saying, you know, therefore this state has to recognize this. So, you know, one other point that the federal Judge Black made in his argument, he claimed that the ban on gay marriage, the recognition of marriage as one man and one woman, is an arbitrary discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And my thought was, that's how he views it, that it's arbitrary, that, you know, sex has nothing to do with marriage. Why should the gender of the two people matter?
Right.
And in reality, you know, what is marriage about if it's about providing for any children that might come from this union? It's not discriminating against them because of their sexual orientation. It's just saying that's not the definition of marriage. It's not about discriminating against the people. It's looking at the nature of the institution.
Exactly.
Yeah, and when I heard him, when I read that quote too, the first thing I thought, because he said it was an arbitrary discrimination, and I'm like, how can a discrimination be arbitrary? That was the first thing that popped in my mind. So I was like, that's kind of weird that he phrased it that way. But anyway, I agree exactly with what you said, and I thought the exact same thing. So, and one thing he also said was that it was his responsibility to give meaning and effect to the guarantees of the federal Constitution. And he also cited a Supreme Court ruling 70 years ago that said, fundamental rights may not be submitted to vote. They depend on the outcome of no elections. So I think that's another thing with this story, is that it's basically become a fundamental right to marry anybody. And then we get into the whole discussion of, well, do we have different rights? Do we have the same rights?
And whose rights trump?
Whose rights trump, right? And then it's just this whole topic is so nebulous. But I think that a large part of this ruling was based on that assumption that this is somehow a fundamental right for everybody.
Right,
so.
Exactly.
All right, that's it for this segment. Thanks so much, Jenny, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have more to talk about after the break. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our next story, the National Institute of Health estimates that 1 in 6 couples will experience infertility. With these numbers in mind, one author and expert in ethics recommends alternatives to in vitro fertilization. So, Patrick, I think the first thing that we always have to keep in mind when we're looking at this is just to really, really understand the pain and the difficulty and the struggle that comes with infertility. This is a very real suffering for people, and we don't want to undermine that.
Absolutely.
You know? The desire for children is good.
Exactly, and I feel so, I feel so much for these people because I can't imagine what it would be like. I've known, I knew before I got married and had kids that I wanted to get married and have kids. And I just couldn't imagine being in that position where you realize that you're infertile. And I mean, I just feel so, I feel so much for these people. And I know it's a real struggle. And I personally have known many people who have been infertile and overcame it, or who are still infertile. And it's a tough time for them. It's tough on their marriage. And as Elizabeth Kirk shared, a couple weeks ago, she's a blogger. She blogged about, the title of it was 10 Things You Really Need to Know About IVF Before Using It. And she's someone who has struggled with infertility. And so I think it's really important to hear it from her and what she had to say. And because I could talk all about being infertile, but I don't know about being infertile, right? So it's really good to hear what she had to say, coming from a good, strong Christian perspective.
Right, absolutely. And speaking of a Christian perspective, the Catholic Church teaches that in vitro fertilization is immoral. There's a lot of people who don't know this, who have never been told this. So can you explain a little bit about why the Church teaches that if life is good?
Yeah, and it might be confusing, right? Because like you said already, the desire to have children is really good. And so it's like, well, why wouldn't you give people the opportunity to have children? And so the reason it's immoral is because it takes the act of creating children outside of the marital act. So, and of course, in order to get sperm from the male, there's often masturbation involved, which is immoral as well. And then what happens is the sperm and the egg are put in a little petri dish and in vitro, and then it's the sperm and the egg meet, it's fertilized, it's now a human person. And in her previous blog, she said, there's a lot of problems with that. And some of the moral issues are there's a very, very low success rate in vitro fertilization. So what ends up happening is you end up killing inadvertent, I'm sure nobody wants to on purpose, but you end up doing it anyway. You end up losing and killing a lot of babies. And sometimes those babies are also stored in like a freezer for a really long time, just frozen, suspended in state for who knows how long. So there's a lot of moral issues related to that. The destruction of life because a human embryo is a human person, and the immoral acts taking it outside of the marriage and everything.
Absolutely, so, yeah. And so, if we look at, there's moral issues, and if somebody says, I don't want to do this because I'm Catholic or because I believe that this is morally wrong, what are some of the alternatives that are out there? That's what Elizabeth Kirk explains in this article. There's a lot of them. She talks about adoption, foster care, but also some other alternatives. What else does she say?
Technology, I know she talked about. And I like that you bring that up because her first article really struck a chord with people. And so people had a lot to say. They got really fiery. They had a whole bunch of comments. And this is just like a topic that really fires people up. And so I'm glad that she had this follow-up article because a lot of times pro-life people are accused of just like, oh, you just want to make sure that babies are there and then you abandon them and you don't care, or there's always this you care in the beginning and then you don't care after that, or you say don't do these things but then there's no alternative or whatever. And so I like that she came back and said here's some alternatives, like for instance technology, and there's a whole list of things that she recommended that people can do to overcome and work through these infertility issues. So what were some that kind of stood out to you? What did you like?
Thought, I thought the idea of spiritual parenthood, foster, or adoption, just being open in other ways to children was really important. I thought that was a big one. But also what you mentioned, technology, I'd like to focus on that just for a second in case our viewers don't know what that is. They're on the cutting edge of treating infertility, and I've talked to a lot of NAPRO doctors, and the basic idea is that infertility is not a disease, it's a symptom. And so when you hear all these people, oh, they're infertile, they were diagnosed with infertility, this is a different approach that says, no, there's something causing that infertility. Maybe you have endometriosis, hormone problems, you're not ovulating properly, there's something wrong with your ovaries. ovaries. So that goes in and examines it and tries to fix the problem. And the success rates are phenomenal. They can be up to 80%, which is 2 to 3 times higher than in vitro. So, and this is respecting women. This is respecting women's bodies. It's solving the actual problem. So this is very much in line with what the church is teaching.
Absolutely.
And it's something we should pursue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that was her first point, what she said was get good medical care. She wants a holistic approach, just like you mentioned, because infertility there's usually something else going on that's causing this infertility. So I think that's a really good point. And then another point that she made was she said to love your spouse, and I think that really has a lot to do with it, because you're in this with them. You're married to them. You're on this as a team, and it's really difficult. And it's something that you guys can, share. You can bear that cross together. I
think that's huge. Even if you never end up being able to conceive a child after all of these things, bearing that cross together and with dignity and with love, that's a very difficult thing to do, but that's what we're called to do.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can read more stories like the ones we discussed tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.